Hello and welcome to the Business Growth Accelerator. This is Isar Meitis, your host, and I'm truly excited about our guest today because it's directly tied to everything I believe in the marketing world today. So let's start with this. The sales and marketing world are changing fast. The only problem is way too many companies are not paying attention to that change. So most companies out there today who do digital marketing are still doing it the way they were doing it 10, 12 years ago. What does that mean? So when digital marketing started, people figured out that they can captures people information. Why was that important? Because that information was not available to salespeople. There was no sales navigator or other pieces of software where you can just find people information. So if you want to find the VP of sales of a company today, it takes you 3 seconds. But back then it was not available. So digital marketing really was more or less an asset to support the sales capturing leads. And so creating different landing pages, different freebies, capturing people's information, doing nurture sequences. And once you had nurture sequences, now you could score people where they are in the sequence. And once they hit a specific score number, now they become an MQL or an SQL, a marketing qualified lead or sales qualified lead. And now that companies had that, like, oh my God, we have all these leads for sales. So how do we scale that? So that's when things started going south. Because once you started being able to scale it, people started giving quotas to their marketing teams. You have to hit this number of MQLs every month. And then it becomes a hamster wheel of just increasing how to get more and more of these quote unquote leads. And again, it served a purpose. So the efficiency of this went down. So you got a lot more leads at a much lower conversion, but sales still kept going up because that's the way it worked. The problem is today, it's not really necessary. Salespeople can find any contact information for any lead without marketing actually capturing them. And most companies forgot to tie this back to revenue. So now the goal of the marketing team is to get MQLs and SQLs, and they don't follow the dots all the way to the end. We're like, how much revenue are we actually generating from this specific channel of MQLs or SQLs? And so that's problem number one. But the bigger problem actually comes from the buyer side. How do they feel about the journey they're going through? Are we shoving it down their throat, or they're actually benefiting, learning, and want to do business with us? And so this is a very big problem that exists today, and it's getting worse as the younger generation takes, or younger generations, I should say, are taking a bigger percentage of the workforce. So I was really excited when I got introduced to Tom Burton, who is our guest today, because he is, first of all, he's walking the walk. He is a co-founder and a COO of a company called Lead Smart Technologies, but he's a serial entrepreneur from California, and he's been doing marketing and sales and growth for companies for a very long time. But he also wrote a book called The Revenue Zone, which identifies the exact problem in much more detail than I did, and also present the solution. So hence, I was very excited when I got introduced to Tom, and I'm very excited to have him on the show because he's going to share with us the blueprint of how to identify where people are in the journey and how to serve them the right way in order to make them want to do business with you versus, oh, they're an MQL, let's throw them on sales and let's see what happens. So Tom, welcome to the Business Growth Accelerator.
Thank you. Awesome summary. Awesome.
Thank you. Tom, you've been, again, doing this for a while. At a certain point in your career, I assume relatively recent career, you figure this out. Like, it's like, the light bulb or some kind of a process that went like, this is broken. When was that time and how did you identify that?
Unfortunately, it was more of a punch in the stomach than it was a light bulb. So I was at a board meeting. I guess this is now almost 2 years ago. And there, of course, at the board meeting, let's talk about your sales projections, right? Let's look at your pipeline. And, so I went through my PowerPoint and my pipeline, and one of the board members at the end said, well, how confident do you feel about this? Like, what is your level of confidence? And I don't know, that was the punch in the stomach. I've done a million of these. It wasn't like this was the first time I presented a pipeline to a board. Yeah. But I realized, like, I really didn't feel confident about what I was presenting, and I didn't know why. That was the hardest thing. It's like, why do I feel this way? And you're asking for an honest answer, and I want to give you an honest answer, and I don't feel like I can do that. So So I kind of gave a BS answer, like, hey, just trust me, and everything's going to be all right. But
Yeah.
when I left there, it really, really hit me, like, what was going on? What was wrong here? Why I didn't trust in what I was doing and saying. And that kind of then led down the rabbit hole of kind of everything that I wrote about in the book and so forth. So yeah, that was the defining moment.
Awesome. Really, those personal experiences where you start questioning everything you know. Because
Yeah.
like you're saying, you've been doing what you've been doing for a while. It's not your first rodeo.
Yeah.
Like, what the hell's going on? Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. So let's define the problem, right? I gave a general summary, but what is the problem that you identified when you started digging into this?
Well, and I think you said it well. It is, the current B2B sales and marketing, which is really a legacy system, right? You pointed out a lot of this is based on legacy concepts,
Yeah.
is really badly broken. I
Okay.
will go one step further and say, even now, especially when you get in kind of the whole, economics and economic downturns, it is a crisis. And it was interesting what I learned as I started, we can go into that a bit more about kind of what created the problem and the situation and why it still existed. But the problem, as you pointed out, is twofold. It is a problem for companies and sellers and marketers because it's not efficient. It's, and maybe back, even just a year or two ago, if you're a VC funded company or whatever, it was okay to spend $2 to get $1 in revenue or $5 to get $1 in revenue. But, those days, I believe, are coming to a close, especially with focuses on profitability and less venture money available. But
Yeah.
in any business that you're in, right, you have to do sales and marketing profitably.
Yeah.
And it's broken and it's not profitable. It's not efficient. But worse than that, and you touched on this as well, is the buyer. And we're pissing off buyers. We're pissing off prospects, right? And a pissed off prospect does not become a customer, nor do they become even, everyone's focused on brand and goodwill. It certainly is not good for your brand, and it's certainly not good for your goodwill. So those two things together have, really, that's why I call it a crisis, because it's not just, hey, I can put a Band-Aid on this. It requires a bit of a step back and overhaul of the whole thing. So you're not pissing off your prospects, and you have a profitable and effective sales and marketing operations. So yeah, it's an issue.
Well said. I think you touched on a very critical point that I didn't touch in my intro, which is we're going into a very different era, at least in the next 18 to 24 months.
Yes.
And that era is going to be impacted on several different levels. One of them is funding.
Mm-hmm.
Way too many companies in the last 10 years, because money was in abundance and investors just threw money into anything because they had nothing else to throw the money into. Focused on growth, not growth of profitability, but growth of top line. Mm-hmm. And profitability was absolutely not a need. It's like, oh, let's just grow,
it doesn't
grow,
drive
grow.
Valuation, right? If you look at the VC model, it's how do I increase my valuation for the next round? And growth and top line growth is what drives that.
Exactly. And I think that's changing dramatically in a very, very short amount of time. Like the last 3 months have been a game changer. The well is drying out, and there's going to be other places to put the money, because you can now in a year probably buy government bonds for 4%. So I'm like, okay, maybe that's not that bad, and it's 100% safe. So I think that is changing. The other thing that is changing is because we're going into a recession, most likely there's going to be less demand. So again, going back to pissing off prospects, that's not the best time to do that, because there's going to be a lot less of them. You can't just burn through 1,000 to have 4 clients.
But no, it totally. And you're wasting, right? Look how many prospects and leads you're wasting right now that you can't afford to waste, per your point.
Yeah, amazing. So I think we framed the problem very well. So now let's talk about the solution, right? Your solution. How do you view the world through the prism of the revenue zone framework to identify what's the right solution?
Yeah. So, and again, I had to go through this. So the first thing is you have to change your mindset and your point of view of how B2B marketing and sales should work, right?
Okay.
So and again, that mindset of MQL, opt-in, MQL, and in a lot of companies, it doesn't even get nurtured, right? If somebody fills in a form on a website, you have SDRs or sales reps calling you within seconds.
Yeah.
So I call it the MQL SDR model, or the MQL model. That whole mindset and that whole approach and the KPIs that are associated with that, you have to completely be willing to change your mindset from that. I get it. It's not easy, right? Because we've been doing it for a long time and there's a lot of process and structure ingrained in that legacy philosophy. So the mindset you need to be thinking about is a few different things. First of all, you have to be willing to accept that the buyer wants to be in control of their own journey, number one. You have to be willing to accept that they want to remain anonymous. So they don't want to talk to a salesperson until they want to talk to a salesperson.
Yeah.
And I've seen this, right? It becomes a bit of like a cat and mouse game or a fight between the seller and the buyer to see, well, how do I figure out how I get that guy on the phone or that person on the phone, right? You got to back off from that. Now, I understand that you think, oh crap, that means I'm losing control, right? How can I control a sales process or build a pipeline if I'm letting my buyer be in control and be anonymous? But you have to accept those two facts. Then the third part of it is you then have to accept or take the mindset that if the first two are true, then I am going to do everything I can to be that guide for that buyer and that prospect and that trusted advisor. And so how do I do that? So knowing those first two, how do I become the guide and the shepherd, if you will, for that prospect or for that, potential buyer going forward? And so that's a big mindset shift versus, and I even find it for myself. It's like, I have to like kind of hit myself a few times because there's such an urge sometimes to go back to, all right, let's get that opt-in. All right, let's follow up with a phone call. All right, let's, all the things that we just have been ingrained, I guess, into our process for so many years, because we feel like we're in control, right? We're in control and we can track it, and yet it doesn't work.
I love what you're saying. I want to add two small points that I think can help people understand it. And it's mostly people in like leadership position in sales and marketing that are pushing this model, right? Mm-hmm. The easiest way is like, think about yourself. Absolutely. How much you hate when you have to go and talk to a salesperson while you're still in the research phase. You don't want to do that. So it's always look at it from the eyes of the buyer. And even when it's your company and you're trying to grow it, you're like, okay, think about how does that feel to the buyer? We have this resentment to salespeople, and it's still because I wouldn't say all salespeople are like, still using old car salesman tactics, but that's what's in our heads. Mm-hmm. And that creates problem number one. And problem number two is, why is it broken and why is it this way? Why is it changing? Because 20 years ago, when you wanted to know what kind of a service the company provides or really understand the product, you had to talk to the salesperson.
Of course.
There was no other way to really understand the details of what they do.
Yeah.
Today, there are Slack channels and forums and podcasts and websites and review sites. And you have zero control as a company of any of these channels. And yet, that's where 85% of the buying journey actually happens. And the person really wants to talk to you when they're considering to buy, not when they're doing research. And you're trying to catch them when they're doing research. And that's the dissonance between the buyer journey and the seller journey, is like, okay, where do we want to meet them? And the truth is, you want to meet them when they're ready, which is what you're saying. So now let's go to the metrics, because I think you perfectly structure the problem. How do I know when they're ready?
Well, and again, and it's not just, hey, go for it and then call me when you're ready, right? That's not a good strategy either.
Yes.
So, and I wanted to add one thing just that you pointed out here as well, because it is this whole self-serve research thing is actually not great for the buyer either. because there's so many rabbit holes they can go
Sure.
down and so many places they can get lost, you become confused.
Yeah.
And I said earlier, a pissed off prospect does not become a customer. A confused prospect does not become a customer.
Great point.
And there's a lot of deals right now, or a lot of situations where a prospect who's very much has a problem, you have a solution, but they don't do anything because they get confused and they can't make a decision. So what we have to do, and again, if I look at it through the mindset of I want to help the prospect not get lost on their journey, right? If I'm a guide, I'm trying to make sure that they're not getting lost on their journey.
Yeah.
So really then what I have to look at is, okay, how do I position my company, myself, my business as that guide, and truly guide them, set up everything in my world, and we'll get into this, but whether it's my website or my content or whatever it is, or even in any sort of personal interaction that I have with them, that I am guiding them to the point which I call the revenue zone. And the revenue zone is a point where that prospect is at a point where they have a reasonable level of demand for your product or service. They have a reasonable level of trust in you and your business, and they're seriously considering making a purchase or spending money with you. Doesn't mean they've gotten out their checkbook yet or put in their credit card, but they're at that point where they feel confident that they're able to decide and move forward and make a purchase at that point. So that's what we want to guide them to. And then, so how do we do that? We'll get into that, but there's a process that I work through to actually accomplish that.
I love that. I want to add something that you say in the book that I found really interesting, is you're saying they're not necessarily want to spend money with you, but they're at the point that they understand the problem, they have enough trust, and they're willing to spend money.
Exactly. Make a decision. Make a decision, which is a
yes.
huge deal, right?
And all you got to do is convince them that that money needs to be spent with you.
Yes.
What are the steps before that? So that's what we're trying to get them, right? So
that's right.
The end of what you describe as the yellow brick road.
Yes.
Where can they be on the road so you can identify where they are and what they need to do? So
in the book, we talk about, the revenue zone matrix, which to me is the new modern funnel, if you will. Okay. So somebody comes in and prospecting is a whole different issue, but let's just say somebody's come to your website, they've become aware of you in some way, shape, or form, right? However that occurred. So they know a little bit about who you are and they know a little bit about what you sell. So that's where I talk about the revenue zone matrix. That's kind of where you enter this new funnel that I call the revenue zone matrix. So the yellow brick road then is, all right, once they know a little bit about who you are and what you do, how then would you best guide them to that revenue zone? Again, knowing the fact that they want to be anonymous and do their own research. And also at the same time, knowing that, you don't want them to get lost and all that kind of stuff. So how do you do that? And this is what we really go through in detail in the book, but the first step is you have to look at, first of all, the revenue. You have to kind of work backwards. So you say, what does it take for somebody to end up in that revenue zone that you just talked about? And I try to keep this simple because you can end up getting really, really complicated with this process. And I've really hoping to make it very simple. The first thing is I ask, companies or people, what are 3 things that they need to understand about your product, service, or company to be in that revenue zone, right? So if I'm selling a software product or whatever, there's 3 things or so, there could be 10, but pick 3, right? That they need to understand to be there. And then what are 3 things that they need to believe about your company, your software, your product, your service, whatever the case may be? 3 understandings, 3 beliefs to be in the revenue zone. Believe me, sounds easy. That process in and of itself can be very difficult for companies. I found it for myself when we went through it with our own company. We wanted to have 20 things. No, we need 3, right? Pick the top 3 that go together. Okay, once you do.
I want to add one more thing to that, which is kind of like the steps on how you get there. How do you get to understand that? Is you need to best guess or research what are the questions that they're trying to solve? What are the problems that they're trying to solve? Because the things they need to know are the things that solve their problem, right? They're in a research for something else because they have a need. Either something's broken or they need something extra to what they have right now.
Exactly.
And if you can understand what are the three biggest problems, pain points, questions that are in their heads, now you can figure out. So again, reverse the process. Think about it from their perspective versus from your perspective as a solution provider.
Exactly. And what I recommend is go back and look at some successful wins that you've had with customers and reverse engineer that, right? And you'll find probably consistently that there were 3 or so things that they really understood, and there's 3 or so things that they really believe that caused them to choose you as their choice for going forward in those things. And you see some consistencies on that as you go forward. And then that says, oh, wow, these wins that we had here, or go back and ask your customers, why did you choose us? And so you can reverse engineer successful wins with existing customers, and you will see common denominators as to why they became a successful sale. So once you know that, then you can work backwards from that and say, all right, this is where the yellow brick road comes in. And this goes back to reverse engineering. What is the ideal path that customer or that prospect that knows very little about you, doesn't understand anything, what is the path that we can lead them down? And again, based on our experience, that leads them back to that point where they're in that revenue zone. And that's usually a path of content and information and so forth, but it's also a sequence. And most people want to consume content and do their research in a sequence, right? So if I'm researching a new product, I'm probably, looking to understand a little bit about what that product does before I'm looking to understand a customer case study, because I have no context to understand that case study that's there. I think we've lost your voice, Isar.
Thank you. I think you raise a very interesting point, and I think that it goes back again to always looking at things from the customer's journey's perspective, from their perspective. And basically you're clarifying what I said before, like what steps, what questions you need to answer and at what sequence.
Sequence is important.
In order to move people through those steps, in order to get them to understand, that these kind of things can solve the problem. And then out of these things that can solve the problem, why should you be the solution versus other solutions that are out there? And it cannot happen in the reverse process.
No.
Because if I'm going to tell you why am I better than the competition, like, well, I'm not sure this still solves my problem, so I don't care if you're better than the competition, which I think is what many sellers jump into. Here's how we're better than the competition. I'm like, I'm still not sure any of you 20 actually solves my problem. And so I think answering those initial questions of helping to guide people from sometimes maybe not being even aware of the problem. So if you can make them aware of the problem that they have, like we're doing right now, right? We're talking about, okay, this thing is broken. A lot of people saying, no, I have MQLs and SQLs and it's running and I'm hitting my numbers quota every month and every quarter. Okay, you have a problem. And your problem is that less and less people want to buy the way you want to sell, which means over time, you're going to have less clients because your competition will figure it out. So you started touching on content. You said content is a good way to do that. Can you be more specific? Can you describe A, what content, and B, how do you distribute to make this effective?
Yeah. So again, go back and if you reverse engineer, right, successful, you'll often find that your prospect went through a certain sequence of how they consumed content around your business or your product or even your competitor's product, but there's stages of what they go through. And you brought up a really good point. If you're in a business where this goes back to those 3 things you understand, if one of the things you have to have an understanding of is the problem, because they're not problem aware or what, earlier in the, you can be problem aware or solution aware or whatever the case may be. But if they're not, then you have additional work you need to do unless they're already aware of the problem. So obviously every business is going to be a bit different on those things. So then from there's content that then you want, and I put in the book, and there's actually a worksheet that I provide to kind of list out all the content that you currently have and what content and what is the successful journey that most of your successful customers have taken in consuming that content. So, and you can find this out a couple of ways. You can find it out by looking, again, talking to your successful customers. You can also look at your website analytics. We learned a lot by going on our website. We found that people were coming to our website, and because we didn't have enough content that aligned with what they were looking for right on the homepage, right? All they were doing is jumping to the pricing page and bouncing off. Right? And there's a whole argument about, do you put pricing on your website? Well, one of the reasons that pricing can be a problem on your website is your prospect goes there, but they have no idea what they're looking at. Right? So your job is to make sure that you set the context of your pricing earlier on so that they don't end up just pricing and bouncing because they jump to a conclusion. So we looked and said, hey, we need more content. When somebody comes to the website, or it's just an example, right? It could be a website or even a social media platform or whatever the case may be, but wherever they're going, how do you then make sure you're presenting the right content? Now, maybe if you're a software company, there's a demo or an overview of your product, or to your point, if they don't understand the problem, then there's a video that says, here are 3 steps to whatever that starts them to understand the problem, whatever that's the start of your yellow brick road. So then let's say they watch, let's just take the demo as an example. And now they understand a bit about what you do. Well, what's the next logical thing that in most cases they would want to know if they're doing the research? Well, they're probably going to want to know a bit more about your company. Yeah. What they might do, they might go Google you or looking for reviews, or, okay, then just make that the next step on your video. Next video, let me take you through whatever, and guide them through the most logical path that you believe that will lead them to that point. And, this is a journey. This is an event. It's not like you do this once and it's just perfect. You have to monitor it and track it. But what you'll find over time as you do this is it gets better and better. You optimize it. You optimize, same way you optimize a funnel, right? Or you optimize a marketing campaign. You optimize what you're doing here. And then one last thing I will say about competition, because you brought it up. And, obviously we have more testing to do, but what we've seen early on is that if you can get prospects to follow your yellow brick road, you will eliminate the competition, because the competition's not doing that.
Yeah.
Right. So
everything you're saying is brilliant. I think it's very, very important. I want to add a few pieces of context from what we do and things that I learn, which are perfectly aligned with what you're talking about. One is, and I think Gartner published that, but one of the big research things out there, and they found recent, like I'm talking about like this past year, 85% or 83%, but somewhere in that range of the buyer's journey happens before they ever interact with anything that is directly related to your company. So your website, your salespeople, your LinkedIn page, 85% happens before that. So the whole idea of that content generation is figuring out, where do my prospects do their research? Where do they do that? Do they listen to podcasts? Do they read Medium? Are they on Slack channels, like, general Slack channels on specific topics? Are they on specific Discord servers? Are they a combination of both? Do they read newsletters on Substack? Like, where are they? And different organizations will have different kinds of audience, and hence they would live in different places. Are they on LinkedIn? Are they on TikTok? Are they on Facebook? Now, where are they? Where do they spend the most amount of time consuming content? Because then you have to adjust the format, the framework, the way you deliver it to where they are and deliver it over there. So that's number one. The other problem that this generates that you talked about is that you really want to track, but all the things I just mentioned are not trackable. It's what, people call it the dark social, right? Or the dark funnel. Like, I have zero way to know who reads my stuff on Medium or who watches my content on LinkedIn. If they engage with it, I know, but I don't know who listens to my podcast. We're recording this. This is going to go out as a podcast. I don't know who listened to it. I know how many people. I know where they are in the world. That's where it ends. So The way to then connect this back to revenue is when people fill out a form on your website to talk to your salespeople, to get a demo, to get a quote, whatever the case, whatever the form is, ask them in the form that they fill out, how did you hear about us? Make it an open text field and make it mandatory. Because then what you're getting that qualitative information that people are going to tell you. And you talked about this of like, do your research. People are going to tell you, I heard you on this and that podcast. I read your blog. Somebody recommended you on the Slack channel when I asked a question. And this, as you do more and more of this, you see those buckets filling up very, very quickly, and you'll see the one or two that are winning, and then just focus most of your energy on them. So it could be your podcast, it could be your LinkedIn channel, it could be specific Slack groups you want to be on and publish content regularly. But by asking people for qualitative information of how, it gives you a great idea of where and what kind of content you should publish.
Yeah, totally agree. It's hard to get quantitative information earlier, right?
Yeah.
So you have to trust the process, as they say.
Yeah.
And if you trust the process, what you will start to see, though, as the prospect moves through their yellow brick road, you will have, whether they end up at your website and there's some strategies that you can use to, let's say somebody goes to YouTube, right? They're constantly looking at, YouTube for searching for information.
Yeah.
Well, there's things that we can do intelligently to maybe take them from YouTube and over to something on our website or something where we can measure a bit more.
Correct.
Now that's different than the opt-in, right? Everybody wants the opt-in and the email. There's other ways to measure that. But yeah, we have to be willing to trust the process and then to use that qualitative data as it comes through. And there's a lot of ways to measure the qualitative data. Like you mentioned, okay, well, we're attribution, like where did you come from, right? But then you should be seeing that when people actually reach out and want to talk to somebody, or you should find that they're a lot more qualified in what they're looking for. You should find that they actually know a lot more and have a lot more demand for your product and trust for if you're a salesperson, that's nirvana, right? What better, you talk about an SQL, that's like a super SQL. And if you're seeing more and more of those, then you're doing things actually correct. And you should, by doing that.
Yeah, I agree. Just to connect the dots of the two things we said, once you have people telling you how because the problem with our tracking data right now is that it's tracking where demand is captured and not where demand is generated. The demand is generated in that 85% that you can't really track because it happens on a platform you don't own. And by the way, that's getting worse and worse with now pixel limitations, iPhone not allowing it, Android is going to start limiting it. So the third-party data is going to become more and more scarce, and it's already a problem. What the tracking tools allow you to track is where do you capture the demand? What was that first touch point, and then second and third, and now you have multi-attribution and all these more sophisticated platforms. It's not first click. It's like, okay, what? But that's the last 15% of the journey. The first 85% of the journey is where you're like, how did you hear about us? And now you start connecting it to what you said. Now you connect it to where you capture the information. And these two items together gives you a lot of cues on how to, you called it, it's the new funnel, right? It's not really a funnel. It's a educational process that is ongoing, that happens on platforms you don't control. But once you have that, now you can start perfecting it more and more and see what's working and not working on both aspects, on the capturing demand, on generating demand. I love this. How do you generate that content?
Generate the content?
Yeah, because now we know we need to generate a lot of content.
Right.
How do I actually do that?
So again, I look at what is the ideal, right? If I were to guide my prospect, and let's say I was able to take them arm by arm, right, and walk them through that yellow brick road, what would be the content that I would like for them to consume in the right order? Obviously, that's nirvana and probably not realistic, but let's start with that, because that's the road that we want to get people down. What we found is there's probably between 20 on average, and every business is different, 25 to 35 touch points, content pieces or places that are part of that journey. starting from when you said, when they first Google or they do whatever they do, right? There's 25 to even up to 50, depending upon what you're selling, touch points along the way that for them to successfully get to the point where they're in that revenue zone. Now, along that way, because of confusion and other things we talk about, they can fall off the road, fall off the cliff, and they get lost, right? So, but to successfully get them there. So you outline what's the ideal journey. And you said funnel, I agree with you. It's not a funnel. To me, it's a journey, right?
Yeah.
How the word funnel should just go away, because the funnel implies I'm controlling the process and no, we're guiding a journey. And so that journey has these steps ideally. And then I start with that. And then I can see, okay, well, what content do I have already that can facilitate that? Where are my gaps? We find a lot of companies already have a lot of really good content. They're just not using it in the right place. It's more of a spray and pray on the content rather than a sequence guide on the content. So how do you take that and then refine it over time to fill in any gaps that you may need?
I love it.
And the book actually takes you through that. There's a worksheet that we go through, and it's very detailed to kind of get that together, because we found that if you try and just whiteboard this without a structure, it can get out of control pretty quickly.
Brilliant. First of all, I think people should go and read the book or listen to the book. It's in audio as well. And there's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of, you mentioned it, a lot of downloadable stuff that like PDFs and worksheets that you can use that makes it very practical. So it's not just a book or like, oh, it's a great theory. Like here's how you actually implement it. So I definitely recommend the book. I want to touch on, again, something that we do that just solves a lot of these problems at the same time. The best content that is out there is content that you co-create with people in your ecosystem,
sure.
Right? Because then it's valuable to them and it's valuable to you. So if you can co-create content, meaning co-create value together with your clients, with your prospects, with your suppliers, with maybe not authority figures, but thinkers in your industry, then that becomes even more and more valuable to everybody. And the way to do this, the easiest way to do this is to have your own show. So if you have your own show, a live talk show that you meet with those people on a weekly basis and you invite the right people to the show, you're constantly answering the questions that these people have because you're doing it together with them. They feel that they're a part of the journey. They share it with their friends some of them are most likely in a similar scenario because they will share it in the ecosystems where they roam because it's business content. So they're not going to share it in their kids' WhatsApp, but they're going to share it in the Slack channel that they're on or in the Facebook group that they're on or on the whatever platform they're on. And that gets you more relevant word of mouth that doesn't come from you. It comes from somebody that they know, that they already have some kind of a level of trust with, developing that content together with you. So there's just a little bit of a hack. And if you do this, if you record video and audio, now this can become anything, because by chopping this off, this can become short snippets. It becomes video, it becomes podcast, it becomes YouTube, it becomes a baseline. You transcribe it, it becomes a baseline for a blog. So from a relatively small investment together with your audience, you get to build content that does everything you talked about and spread it across multiple channels with relatively low effort.
Yeah, you're right on. And I talk about this in the book. In fact, I kind of do a call out in one of the sections about this, because what you're talking about is your partners and your customers are influencers.
Yeah.
Right. They're influencers to your prospect. They're not influencers like, Kim Kardashian's carrying this purse or whatever. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, more practical influence. So if you can incorporate in your content influence, it will turbocharge your yellow brick road.
Yeah.
And I go into that, don't over or underestimate the importance of influence in your content and how you put it together. So, and we could probably do a whole nother show on how to actually build that content and leverage it off of, even YouTube and as a prospecting strategy and all of that kind of stuff. But there is anytime that you can inject influence into your content in the right way, right? Without it then being, a pitch or whatever, but really injecting true influence into your content, it will definitely accelerate and I call turbocharge your yellow brick road process.
Phenomenal. I I want to ask you one more thing that I ask a lot of people as far as resources that you use. And with you specifically, I'm sure you have your dream tech stack on what works well for some of these steps that you use or that you recommend to people to use. Can you recommend some things on what are different tools that you use for different steps in that process?
Well, you had mentioned earlier, right? The whole issue of third-party data and all of that. And I actually have I think a half a chapter in the book where I get into third-party and first-party data. You need to be thinking about how you capture first-party data and what I call even zero-party data, which is the information that you're getting, so first-party data is a lot of times, well, they clicked on my website or they did something, but what are they telling you? What conversations are you having with your prospects? Whether it's through a salesperson or a chat or whatever the case may be, or even things that you can do through quizzes and surveys. The more information you can get about your prospect, you want to record all of that. And so, that my company, LeadSmart, the CRM that we do, is designed predominantly for that purpose. It's designed to be a repository of first-party and zero-party data to then be able to use that to help drive and have intelligence in what you're doing next, which is a little different than a lot of CRMs that you think about. Oh, I think of CRM as a contact management tool or a place to log sales activity.
Yeah,
that's fine, but that's not really going to give you the value that a CRM kind of framework can be. So that's kind of the core that you want to start doing, is making sure that you're capturing that first party data, that zero party data, that information that's there, because it's super valuable. And to rely on third party data, as you pointed out, is just, it's expensive and it's becoming less and less practical along the way.
Yeah.
And so then there's other tools in this tech stack that I go into, like, okay, well, how do you get that data efficiently, especially when people are more anonymous? How do you organize, like I talk about in there, having a resource center even on your website where you can organize your content a bit more effectively, rather than just having it, make it easy for the person. So really the tech stack, without going into a ton of details, has a couple of different objectives. One is to be able to track that first party data and have some insights into what's going on, and have as much insights even in this dark world or the anonymous zone. But the second part of your tech stack is, how do I make this even a better experience, an easier experience, a more productive experience for the buyer? And don't just look at about me, but again, looking at with the buyer. So that's kind of the high level. And that's one of the chapters we talk about, is what is the revenue zone tech stack? And what's cool is I'm learning about more and more different technologies all the time that we can add into that and refine with it, that actually accomplish those two things.
Tom, this was a really great conversation. I learned a lot. I'm sure the audience learned a lot. It's a really important mind shift that people have to make if they want their companies to keep on growing in this new future that it's the present, right? But it's going to go much more extreme as things move forward. If people want to learn more, want to connect with you, want to work with you, what's the best way to do that?
Well, if you want to check out the book, you can certainly get it on Amazon. The audiobook is there. We have a website called therevenuezone.com. So the links are all there. We also have a resource center, as I mentioned, on there that has a ton of resources that align to the book. I want people, my ideal situation right now is to get people to just, read the book or consume the content of the book, understand the philosophy, and just start thinking about how they want to apply it in their own business. Because I'm passionate about that. Because if we continue to do these old things as an entrepreneur, I just hate to watch people, do things, including myself, that are not going to be successful. As far as, personally, love to connect on LinkedIn. T Burton 5350 is the name, but there's a bunch of Tom Burton, so I'm T Burton 5350. Love to just, if you have, in fact, I'm getting quite a few people that are just reaching out and asking, hey, are you willing to, give me some feedback on how we're doing and what we're doing? Yeah, sure. Let's do it. And then LeadSmart, my software company, is leadsmarttech.com. You can check out some of the stuff there as well. We're constantly working on refining our own yellow brick road and making it better. And we love feedback and anything from that as well.
As I said, Tom, this was phenomenal. I had a blast. I learned a lot. And I really thank you so much for joining us with the show today.
That was great. Thank you, sir.
Woo! Awesome. This was really, really great.
Okay, good.
I truly enjoyed the conversation. There's different kinds of interviews, and I know you've been on a lot, so I'm sure from your end you're experiencing them differently. But it's some of them become very conversational, which I absolutely love.
Yeah.
Now it's a back and forth, and you keep on adding and expanding and getting more and more information on the hands of the people on the other side, where they can really learn a topic because we can both add to one another and complement one another. So it was really phenomenal.
Well, it's cool. Obviously, you really get this. You obviously have lived it, and live in the marketing world. So you have an appreciation for the situation.
Listen, 100% of what we do as a business, right? The reason I have a business is because even the people who get it don't know how to connect the dots together, mostly the content side, right? So we are a know, like, trust relationship building engine. That's what we are. So you're talking about the yellow brick road. We have the machine that builds the road.
Yes.
And it's a machine.
Okay.
And it's a machine that is now extremely efficient because we've been doing this for 2 years for several different companies in several different industries, and we keep on iterating and changing it. So the ability to go from really the biggest trick that we have is what I shared when we talked right now, is if you do a live show regularly on a regular basis and you talk with your target audience all the time, it's the ultimate customer research. It's the ultimate feedback loop of anything you want to test out, whether it's new messaging, new features in the product, or new direction for the product. It's the ultimate relationship building mechanism, because people who will never take your note on LinkedIn, if you invite them as an expert of your show, they will come always. Like we had together across all the shows we're doing today, we're probably touching 1,000, maybe more shows. We had, I don't know, 10 people say no. So it's 99.9% of people will say yes. Maybe they will say, well, I can't do this month. Talk to me in July. Okay, fine. So it's the ultimate connection tool. And the content that you're generating is always co-created with the relevant people. So they will share it. And that builds, and the fact you're doing it live and you're making people feel a part of the journey grows a community around your business of people who are already believers.
Yes.
And the real magic happens about 9 to 12 months in, when you have a core group in there that already believe and they feel that this is your company's, their journey.
Yes.
Now, it's not your journey, it's their journey.
Yes.
And people come into wherever the community is run, right? I don't care at this point. Like, it could be Slack, it could be like tech companies, it's mostly Slack. Older companies, it's mostly Facebook groups. But then you have somebody coming in and saying, hey, I've been on the show 3 times. It looks interesting. Have anybody here done business with them? And then 30 people said, yes, absolutely. They're amazing. They're great. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. No, they become your own sales team. Right?
10 people will write a freaking blog post, like 800 words on Slack.
Yeah.
I've never, ever seen, but they will say, I started joining this with a situation on the business. This was a problem we were having. I worked with so-and-so. He helped me figure out this. We started working with them. This. That's it. They're sold because it's a third party that has been where they were. So the context is perfect. That tells them that this is the right thing to do. And it's just magical to watch that thing working, which literally just does everything you're talking. It's just a machine that knows how to do it.
What's really interesting on a couple of fronts is, so your system, right, is manufacturing what I was saying, influencer injected content all the way along, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
The revenue zone, or the red yellow brick road, says, okay, how do you best use that content in the right sequence, right, over time to drive, and you can start filling in gaps in your yellow brick road. So if you know, God, I got a big gap here. Okay, let's do a show on blah with somebody. Good, I'll take some of that content and fill in the gap, right, that I'm missing here. And over time, that yellow brick road, your bricks become really tight, along the way. Right now, they're kind of, there's some cracks in them and some potholes along the way. The other thing, and this is something, this is sort of my vision, and I scheduled some time for us to chat when you get back.
Yeah.
You mentioned Discord. I ultimately want to create out of this sort of, whether it's using a DAO or an NFT or something like that, a true community of people that are revenue zoners, basically, right? And create a movement to actually accomplish what we do. I love the NFT concept, not because of the art, but because of the utility that can be provided.
Building a community with NFTs is absolutely brilliant.
But it's too early, right? When you,
I don't know.
It's too early if you don't have enough people in your community. Right now, I don't have enough people.
I think in the beginning, it's too much of an overhead. I think you
need an overhead, right?
You need a critical mass.
That's right.
To justify the thing. And the critical mass doesn't have to be big, right? We see that with some of our biggest clients. We ask them, like, what's the core? Like, you have 35. Now it's over. Like, our biggest group has more than 4,000 people in for one client.
Okay.
4,000 people. How many of those drive business and really drive the community? The ones that are the machine, 30 to 40.
Probably, yeah.
30 to 40 people. It needs to be the right 30 to, so it's not the first 30 to 40.
Right. It's the 30 or
but you need a critical mass of 30 to 40 people. That's it. And probably if you have half, you can start doing more interesting things. So people are like, oh, by the time I get to 3,000 people, I'm like, you don't need 3,000 people.
That's an interesting, it's an interesting concept. So if you get your core team, basically, from there, you can really start to build on.
Now the snowball starts rolling down the hill.
Yeah. And by the way, the NFT concept could include start to take maybe the next layer of people that are not normally contributors because they feel like they have some ownership in the whole thing.
Yeah. Another thing that happens again, now we have a gazillion tricks on how to do that, right? So how do you make people come closer and closer in? And one of it is do a very deliberate question handoff. So somebody goes into the forum, the panel, the Discord, wherever, it doesn't matter which the platform, and asks a question. You can have a team answering the question. The smart thing to do is to say, hey, you know what? I know the perfect guy to answer that question. Tom Burton is an expert on that topic. He doesn't work for the company, right?
Right.
He's part of the group. Hey, Tom, there's a guy here who's in your situation. Can you answer the question?
Right.
So these warm handoffs, A, makes Tom feel amazing. Like, oh my God, I'm really contributing here. B, the other guy's like, oh, this is a real community. It's not just a company pushing down content. So you achieve multiple goals by doing this. And again, the only way to know that is to start getting to know the people. What are their strengths and weaknesses? What is their background? So there's work to be done. But that's one of the tricks that we use in order to start growing that core group that really, really helps. Another thing that I really liked, I didn't want to record it because we talked about so many things, but early on when I started creating content, I started blogging. That was the first thing I did. And I wrote a blog about that the funnel is the dumbest analogy that was ever created. Because in the funnel, you pour a lot of water in the top and gravity takes all that water with no effort and pushes it down the thing. That's what a funnel does.
Yes.
And I'm like, this is as far as possible from a user journey there is. A user journey is a climb steep up a foresty mountain.
Yes.
That's what it is. They don't exactly know where they're going. They don't exactly know where they need to go. It's uphill. There is no, the gravity will bring everything down.
The gravity is working against them, not for them.
Some people will get lost, and some people don't have the strength to go all the way, and some people don't have the motivation to go all the way. And you need to be their guide to take them. And that's before I knew what I was like. I couldn't have had the conversation that I'm having with you today 3 years ago or 4 years ago when I wrote this. This was a very raw concept. I'm like, this is so dumb. Like, we've been talking about funnels for so many years. It's not a funnel. It's an uphill battle through the trees. Right, that's what you're doing.
If you have that, you still have that blog post?
I'm sure I do. I will look at. I literally totally forgot about it until you started talking about being the guide, and I actually did not think about it when I heard you talk about the museum, which is a great. That's a great example, right? Because especially the one that you're saying, I didn't really want to be there. It's not even. It's not. I went on a hike up the mountain and I got to the. I didn't want to go. Like, somebody brought me here.
Right. But and I was thinking it was going to be horrible, and it didn't turn out to be so bad because there was a guy.
Yeah. So I will find the blog post and I'll send it to you. And I will read it myself because I think there's a lot of things I've learned since. I know there's a lot of things I've learned since. Awesome. This was really, really great. I'm looking forward to talking to you again once I get back. If you have any questions in between, absolutely.
When will this likely come out?
4 to 6 weeks.
4 to 6 weeks. Okay. All right.
And this is again the team. I have the machine now. The machine's working. I'm done with my work.
Okay.
The machine's working, and they're gonna chop it off, and you will get access to all the pieces of content that we generate. So you're gonna get about 5 short videos for social media. You're gonna get quote cards of like 1 sentence with your image and so on. Wow. You're gonna get access to the podcast player if you want to put it on your website, and the YouTube, like we give out everything we do because of what I said. I want you to publish it.
Yes, and we will.
It serves the whole idea in this thing. The company is called Be the Stage because we really believe that everybody on this planet has knowledge to share with other people who need it. That's one of our core values of the company. And B is because we really believe that you don't want to be the star of the stage. You want to let other people shine on the stage. Hence, you want to be the stage and not the star of the stage, because this is how you attract more people. If you make everybody feel like a rock star, they all want to be your friends and want to be around you. Yes. And a lot of the philosophies behind many steps of the processes of what we do are aligned with that. So,
have you created any NFT type communities so far?
I haven't. I've started researching the whole concept and how to tie it together. And I know Discord is probably the only one that makes it kind of easy for people right now.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to become more and more of a commodity in the next 2 to 4 years, and more mainstream and easy to do, because today it's technically
challenging. It's technically challenging.
So
that'll get better.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. All right. Well, have a great trip. And we'll talk more when you get back. I think I scheduled later in July when you were back. So
awesome. This was great. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you. I did too.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Talk soon. Bye.